Why was the Book of Enoch banned from the Bible? Why did religious authorities go to such lengths to erase it from history, to denounce it, to lock it away in obscurity for nearly 2,000 years? The answer is not as simple as theological disagreement or canon debates. This wasn't a matter of oversight. It was an act of censorship, deliberate, aggressive, and strategic. The Book of Enoch didn't just offer a different spiritual perspective. It threatened the entire foundation of religious control by exposing truths that were never meant to survive. This is not a story about a forgotten scroll. It is a suppressed chronicle of cosmic rebellion, hybrid abominations, divine retribution, and apocalyptic prophecy. It presents a version of history that pulls back the veil on angels who fell, not by accident, but by choice, by lust, by hunger, by treason. It reveals that the earth was not merely a home for mankind, but a battlefield for forces far older, far more advanced, and far more dangerous than anything Sunday school ever prepared you for. The Book of Enoch details forbidden knowledge, technologies and powers given to man by celestial beings who broke divine law. It speaks of genetics, warfare, sorcery, and systems of control that twisted the human race into something unnatural. It warns of floods that didn't just wash away sin, but buried a species. It describes judgment, not in poetic terms, but in surgical detail. And yet this book was removed, blacklisted, cut out of the Bible, and cast into the shadows. The question is, why? The answer is as terrifying as it is simple. Because if Enoch was right, then everything we've been taught about the origins of humanity, the role of angels, the nature of evil, and the trajectory of our future is not just incomplete. It's a lie. And not just a mistake of the records kind of lie, but a deliberate rewriting of history, orchestrated to keep humanity ignorant of its past and blind to what's coming. This isn't about religious belief. This is about survival. This is about decoding a hidden past to understand a rapidly approaching future. And as we dig into the Book of Enoch, we begin to uncover a blueprint, one that spans from the birth of man to the end of days. A message that warns, what happened before will happen again. The Book of Enoch is a text that shouldn't exist. It comes from a time before the Bible was even fully formed, written between 300 BCE and 100 CE, and yet it presents itself as a direct revelation from the great-grandfather of Noah. This is the same Enoch who, in Genesis, is described as having walked with God before mysteriously vanishing, taken up without ever dying. That short, cryptic reference is all we're given in the Bible. No explanation, no elaboration, just a disappearing man who somehow pleased the divine so profoundly that he was removed from earth entirely. But Enoch's own book tells a far deeper, darker story. Preserved in full only within the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which notably remains outside the control of Roman and Western religious hierarchies, the Book of Enoch is a sprawling narrative that describes an ancient war in the heavens, the corruption of mankind by otherworldly entities, and a cycle of destruction and rebirth that threatens to repeat. It contains 5 major sections, including the Book of the Watchers, which reads like a lost chapter from Genesis, only more raw, more detailed, and more terrifying. Early Christian figures such as Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and even writers of the New Testament were familiar with Enoch's writings. The Book of Jude, for example, quotes Enoch directly, word for word, referring to his prophecy of the coming judgment. For a time, Enoch was treated as scripture. It was read, it was respected, it was quoted, and then, just like that, it vanished. Why would a text with such direct influence be erased from the official record? Because it does something no other biblical text dares to do. It names names. It points fingers. It accuses angels of rebellion. It accuses the divine council of secrecy. It shows mankind as a species manipulated, genetically altered, spiritually deceived, and forcibly reset. The Book of Enoch wasn't just left out of the Bible, it was buried. Because if it's true, the consequences are catastrophic. What we're dealing with is not merely apocryphal literature. This is a document that claims to reveal the blueprint of human corruption and celestial intervention. It shows us that history as we know it is not just incomplete. It's an intentional misdirection, a cover-up. And the closer we read, the clearer it becomes that this isn't mythology. It's testimony. The Book of Enoch opens with a descent. 200 angels, sentinels of heaven known as the Watchers, observe humanity from above. But they don't just watch. They fall. Not by accident, but by intent. Led by a being named Semyaza, these angels break the boundaries between heaven and earth and descend upon Mount Hermon, where they swear an oath to carry out a forbidden act, to take human women as their wives. What follows is not a romantic union, it is biological trespass. The offspring of these unions are the Nephilim, giants of immense size, strength, and violence. Abominations. They consume the land, the animals, and eventually, mankind itself. These hybrid beings are not simply metaphorical representations of sin or arrogance. The way Enoch describes them, they are literal. They are physical. They are monsters. But it doesn't stop there. The Watchers, while copulating with human women, also begin transferring knowledge. They teach mankind how to forge weapons, how to use enchantments, how to manipulate metals, how to read the stars, how to adorn the body with cosmetics, how to perform rituals of seduction and war. These aren't angelic gifts. They're tools of control. These are the seeds of sorcery, science, and civilization, planted not by divine will, but by interlopers who violated the natural order. Now, here's the question that burns at the edge of every mind that dares to read Enoch literally. Were these Watchers truly angels in the way religious doctrine teaches? Or were they something else entirely? Something older? Something from beyond the stars? Enoch doesn't describe them with wings and halos. He describes beings of power descending from the sky, physically interacting with humanity, and transmitting both genetics and technology. This story is not unique. Nearly every ancient culture, from the Sumerians to the Mayans, from the Greeks to the Hindus, has a version of this myth. Sky beings who descend, who teach, who create a hybrid species, who become gods in the eyes of men. The Anunnaki, the Devas, the sons of Zeus, the feathered serpents, they all follow the same pattern. Different names, same phenomenon. And if these weren't spiritual metaphors, but misunderstood descriptions of literal contact, then the Book of Enoch becomes the most detailed ancient alien account ever recorded. It describes not only the moment of first contact, but the consequences. The Nephilim were not the goal. They were the byproduct. The real objective was control, of knowledge, of reproduction, of evolution itself. What Enoch reveals is that humanity was tampered with, that we are not the result of isolated natural development, but of celestial intervention, that the human story, our DNA, our myths, our religions, are not separate things, but reflections of a single horrific truth, that the gods came down, and they broke the world. The Watchers didn't just mate with human women. They dismantled the natural order of Earth. Once they descended and broke the barrier between the divine and the human, They began to rewrite civilization from the inside out. They became kings, teachers, manipulators, and gods. They handed down knowledge that no human was meant to possess. Enoch lists it methodically, not in vague spiritual language, but in precise categories: metalworking, alchemy, enchantments, astrology, beautification, warfare, herb lore, weather manipulation, seduction. It wasn't wisdom they gave. It was power, raw, weaponized, seductive. Azazel, one of the key watchers, is singled out for teaching men how to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, tools of death, tools of conquest. He also gave them the art of cosmetics, of ornamentation, of how to exploit desire and manipulate appearance. He infected the species with the worship of vanity and violence, all in one breath. Other watchers introduced enchantments and root-cutting, early sorcery, proto-pharmaceuticals, forbidden rites that bridged the material and the unseen. They mapped the stars not for beauty or navigation, but for divination. They introduced systems of control built on ritual, symbols, frequencies, and secrets. Humanity absorbed it all like fire on dry grass, and as they did, the earth itself began to recoil. The Nephilim, the monstrous hybrid offspring of these unions, devoured everything. They didn't just kill and eat animals. They began consuming men, corrupting women, and eventually turning on each other in endless bloodshed. The Book of Enoch describes a planet descending into chaos, into absolute spiritual and biological entropy. Humanity was no longer human. The divine image had been violated, overwritten, reprogrammed. And here's the horrifying part. This wasn't a one-time event. Enoch suggests it was the beginning of a pattern, a cycle, a loop that echoes through history in different forms. Even today, we see shadows of it in our own era: genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, bioweapons, surveillance systems, the increasing worship of form over essence, identity over soul. We're on the edge of rewriting our own biology again, crossing thresholds we don't fully understand, hacking the code of life with the same arrogance the Watchers once displayed. This isn't just a warning about the past. It's a blueprint of corruption. It's a reminder that the first fall wasn't about sin. It was about technology, power, and unauthorized access to knowledge that was supposed to remain locked behind the veil. The Watchers turned Earth into an open system, exposed to forces it was never meant to contact. And now, millennia later, we are doing it again, blindly and willingly. We are becoming the Watchers of our own age. If you believe that knowledge is neutral, that tools are just tools, then Enoch's writings should disturb you even more. Because they don't suggest that knowledge is bad. They suggest that certain knowledge is unfit for human minds, that certain doors, once opened, can never be closed. And the Watchers didn't just open those doors, they kicked them off their hinges and invited humanity to walk through without any idea what waited on the other side. Enoch makes one thing violently clear. Once humanity was infected with this knowledge, it was no longer salvageable. The corruption was irreversible. And so, a reset was coming. The flood wasn't about rain. It wasn't just a punishment for mankind's misbehavior. That's the sanitized version, the simplified tale you hear in children's books and sanitized sermons. According to Enoch, the flood was a surgical purge, an extinction-level event designed to wipe out a corrupted experiment gone wrong. The earth was infected, not just spiritually, but genetically. The human species had been altered. The Nephilim were not only destroying the world, they were rewriting it. In the face of this, Enoch is given visions. He is shown what's coming, he is told to warn Noah, not because Noah was morally perfect, but because his bloodline remained intact, uncorrupted, still human. The flood, in this version, becomes a targeted act of cleansing. The goal was not to destroy all mankind, but to preserve a single clean line, to reboot the human genome and bury the Watcher's legacy beneath thousands of years of water and time. But Enoch doesn't stop with the flood. He presents it as one reset in a series. His visions suggest a pattern of rise and fall, of intervention and judgment, of technology leading to corruption, followed by annihilation. He sees empires that rise from forbidden knowledge and fall under divine wrath. He sees stars falling from the sky, mountains melting, beasts mutating, and civilizations crumbling. He describes signs in the heavens, earthquakes, and a division between the righteous and the damned, not in a vague future, but as part of an eternal rhythm. The flood was a warning, not just to the people of Noah's time, but to us, to every generation that reaches the same threshold, where arrogance and power converge, where mankind begins to act like gods, where the forbidden becomes desirable, where the Watcher's influence rises again, not through physical offspring, but through ideas, systems, and unseen hands pulling the strings. And if the flood was the first reset, the question is not if another one is coming. The question is when. Are we standing at the edge of another purge? Is history about to repeat itself? Not in water, but in fire, in war, in collapse? If Enoch is right, we're not just living in the last days of an empire. We're living in the final echoes of a second corruption, and the judgment is already moving. The flood didn't destroy the Watchers. That's one of the most disturbing revelations in the Book of Enoch. The Nephilim, their monstrous offspring, were wiped out, drowned beneath the rising waters of a divine purge. But the Watchers themselves, the fallen angels who started the corruption, were not killed. They were sentenced, bound by chains and cast into the depths of the earth. They were sealed in darkness, Tartarus, the pit, the abyss. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. Enoch describes their punishment with almost clinical precision. The archangels, under divine order, descend and bind them with chains of fire, entomb them in caverns of blackness, and seal them off until the day of final judgment. They are conscious, they are trapped, and they are still there. This is not a vague allusion to damnation or theological symbolism. The text presents it as a geographic and dimensional reality, a location, a prison, a place where these beings remain alive, aware, and restrained until their time is up. And that's the point that gets ignored. Their time is limited. Their punishment has an end date. They were not destroyed. They were delayed. So, where are they now? Tradition holds that they were buried beneath the earth, deep in regions untouched by mankind. Some suggest the foundations of the earth are not merely tectonic plates and molten cores, but layers of hidden realms, zones of containment, ancient vaults holding beings whose existence predates civilization itself. Antarctica often enters the discussion, not just because it's remote, but because it's locked down by every major world power under strict international treaty, despite being a frozen wasteland with no strategic value on the surface. A place where satellite images have been censored and exploration is restricted. A place surrounded by mystery, whispers of ancient ruins, magnetic anomalies, and underground structures buried beneath ice a mile thick. Others suggest they are not beneath the earth at all, but inside another layer of reality entirely. Not in hell, but in a dimension parallel to ours. a sealed frequency, a vibrational cell, and it is here that modern science, knowingly or not, becomes a potential key. CERN's Large Hadron Collider, the most powerful particle accelerator on Earth, exists to collide protons at near-light speed to tear open the subatomic structure of the universe. But if the Book of Enoch is more than myth, if the abyss is a sealed dimensional space holding the watchers, then smashing through the fundamental layers of matter might not just be an experiment in physics, it could be the equivalent of prying open a prison gate. There are serious minds, not conspiracy theorists, but respected researchers and physicists, who warn that CERN could potentially open doors we are not equipped to understand. What if the abyss is not just a place, but a seal, a lock? And what if we are unlocking it? Even without breaking seals, the influence of the Watchers never truly vanished. Their direct actions were frozen in time, but their knowledge, the very tools that corrupted mankind, survived the flood. Passed down in fragments, resurrected in mystery schools, encoded in the rituals of ancient priesthoods, and eventually absorbed into secret societies. You don't need to believe in literal fallen angels to see their fingerprints all over modern civilization. The same obsession with manipulating matter, altering life, predicting fate, and controlling populations through ritual and symbol. It all traces back to the same origin, the same moment of cosmic rebellion. The Watchers may be buried, but their doctrine is not. It moves through history like a virus, attaching itself to power, whispering in the minds of rulers, scientists, and prophets. And if the Book of Enoch is true, if these beings are real, imprisoned, and counting the days until their release, then we are not alone. We have never been alone. We are living on top of something ancient, malevolent, and waiting. And the only reason we've survived this long is because something stronger has kept them locked beneath us. But locks can break. Seals can be opened. And when that happens, the world doesn't go back to normal. The world burns. Enoch didn't just see the past. He was shown what comes next. What lies beyond the corruption, beyond the flood, beyond the binding of the Watchers. He was taken on a journey, beyond earth, beyond time, into the highest heavens, into cosmic realms where the laws of reality bend and break. And what he saw there wasn't paradise. It was devastation. He describes the stars falling from the sky, not as poetry, but as judgment. Celestial bodies, powers, intelligences crashing down into Earth's domain. He sees beasts rising from the earth, hybrid creatures, distorted monstrosities that move across the land in waves. He sees the skies tearing open, the mountains crumbling, the sea boiling, and humanity running, not in defiance, but in utter terror. And within that terror, he sees something else: structures, thrones, forces sitting above the chaos, not surprised, not panicked, but in control, watching, orchestrating, pulling the strings of destruction from beyond the veil. The imagery becomes layered, symbols wrapped in events, events wrapped in prophecy, prophecy wrapped in code. But through all of it, a single message emerges. This is a cycle. This is a blueprint. And it has been triggered before. The Book of Revelation, often seen as the cornerstone of biblical apocalypse, mirrors Enoch's visions. The same language, the same beasts, the same cosmic unraveling. But while Revelation reads like a warning from the future, Enoch reads like a message from the past, one that tells us it's all happened before. The Watchers fell. Their children were destroyed. Their knowledge infected the world, and judgment came. But the Watchers are still imprisoned, which means their influence is still beneath the surface, pushing. And Enoch's visions suggest they don't stay buried forever. The pit doesn't hold forever. The sky breaks open. The cycle restarts. And this time, it ends with fire. The Book of Enoch wasn't forgotten. It was removed, scrubbed from the canon with intent, buried under centuries of theological silence, pushed out of seminaries, and quietly condemned by the same religious structures that built their authority on the texts they chose to preserve. This wasn't a simple matter of apocryphal status or disputed authorship. It was something deeper, something strategic. The content of Enoch, its revelations, its implications, threatens the entire narrative that institutional religion has constructed to maintain control. That's why it was erased. This book doesn't merely offer an alternate version of Genesis, it undermines it. It repositions the story of humanity from one of divine obedience and occasional rebellion to one of alien intrusion, spiritual warfare, and biological corruption. It tells us that angels fell not because of disobedience in heaven, but because they descended to earth with intent to rewrite the natural order. It tells us that mankind didn't just fall morally, it was tampered with, hacked, altered, and almost destroyed by beings that had no right to be here. It doesn't present evil as a byproduct of free will, but as a foreign infection, seeded into our world through technology, hybridization, and secret knowledge. If that version of the story is true, then the comfortable theology of salvation, repentance, and divine hierarchy falls apart. You're no longer just a sinner in need of grace. You're a descendant of a contaminated species, a survivor of a cosmic war you were never supposed to know about. Your world is not a stage for moral development, but a battlefield built on ancient bloodlines, forbidden technology, and multidimensional politics. That is why it had to go. And that is only the beginning of what made the Book of Enoch dangerous. It also suggests that the corruption of mankind was permitted to continue, that the systems of power we see today may still be influenced by the same forces that started it all. The Watchers might be bound, but their teachings survived. Their legacy is alive in the occult, in the rituals of elite societies, in the symbols etched into the architecture of governments and churches. If you follow the threads far enough, you start to see that the knowledge the Watchers gave, the control over life, death, warfare, and perception, never disappeared. It was adopted, refined, and hidden under layers of doctrine, empire, and secrecy. This isn't just about the past. This is about a deliberate effort to conceal the truth of what humanity is and what it has always been up against. When you look at the ancient texts that were included in the Bible, they're tidy, streamlined, and politically safe. The Book of Enoch is none of those things. It's messy, violent, unfiltered, and impossible to fully control. It speaks of angels rebelling, creating monsters, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, and being punished not with death, but with containment and eventual return. You think any religious authority wanted that circulating in the public? You think the Vatican, or the early Roman Church, or the theological architects of modern Christianity wanted believers wondering if demons were actually interdimensional criminals? If giants once ruled the earth? If prophecy is really a cycle of resets governed by cosmic law rather than divine mercy? No, so they stripped it, cut it out, left it to rot in the outer rings of history. But here's the catch. They didn't destroy it completely. Because they couldn't. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved it, despite the Western world's silence. And now, with modern access to ancient texts, translations, and technology, the book is returning. And it's resurfacing in a world that looks far more like Enoch's visions than most are willing to admit. You're told to dismiss it, that it's not canonical, that it's symbolic, that it's heretical. But the fact that they're still trying to convince you not to read it, that they still treat it like a virus after thousands of years, tells you all you need to know. It was never about protecting your faith. It was about protecting the system. Enoch's writings are not just a grim history of a fallen world. They are a map of what happens next. And that's the part that should make you stop and look around, because nothing in this book reads like ancient mythology anymore. The Watchers, the Nephilim, the Flood, the Abyss, the Final Judgment, it all feels closer now. The world we're living in is already echoing with the same patterns: scientific overreach, genetic experimentation, the blending of species, the obsession with knowledge, with power, with transcending our limits. We are becoming gods in our own minds, creating life in labs, mapping the stars, predicting fate through machines, teaching artificial intelligence to rule and generate thought, dreaming of digital immortality, and rewriting the body through code. The sins of the Watchers are being repeated, not as rebellion, but as progress. And those who question it are ignored, ridiculed, or silenced. The Book of Enoch tells you that this has happened before. It tells you that the flood wasn't just a moral reset, it was a genetic purge, that when humanity reaches the edge of its own destruction through pride and forbidden knowledge, there comes a reckoning. One that doesn't arrive with warnings and mercy, but with sudden collapse. The powers that were chained are not gone. They are waiting, watching, whispering through bloodlines, institutions, ideologies. And when their time is up, they will rise, not with fire and trumpets, but through technology, through revelation, through global collapse that looks like progress until the mask falls off. You were never supposed to read this book. You were never supposed to know. But now you do. And the only question left is whether you'll pretend you didn't hear it, or start preparing. Not in fear, but in awareness. Not in desperation, but in clarity. Because the same forces are still at work. The same rebellion is unfolding. And the same choice is in front of you now that it was in Enoch's time. Wake up, or be erased.